Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, May 21st, and I am going to give you the update first starting with the statistics and then moving into what is the latest and greatest news from Sonoma County. All right, we currently have 225 active cases, 204 recovered cases, still the 4 fatalities for a total of 433 cases. Of those 433 cases, we have 221 female and 212 with respect to the age ranges. From the age range of 0 to 17, we have 68. From the age range of 18 through 49, we have 229. From the age range of 50 through 64, we have 84 cumulative cases. And then in the 65 and over, we have 51 cumulative cases. And there is currently one case that is an unknown age, so that's listed as under investigation. With respect to the geographic breakdown, we have 32 cases cumulatively from North County, 73 from South County, 21 from East County, 20 from West County, 266 from Central County, and 21 that are currently under investigation. Of the cases, 397 of the total have not required hospitalization, whereas 36 have required hospitalization. In terms of where those cases are coming from, we have 48 that were related to travel, 269 were associated with close contacts of a confirmed positive patient, 83 were community spread, and 33 remain under investigation. In the world of testing, we have 16,990 negative tests and 433 positive tests. All right, now this is sort of the big news of the day, and that is that yesterday, Sonoma County formally submitted an attestation to the state stating that we meet their criteria, the new criteria that were released on Monday, in order to move into what's being called Phase 2B by the state. So further into Phase 2. To date, there have actually been 42 counties that were already approved and received this attestation, which allows them to move forward with sort of, more phased reopenings of local businesses. In Sonoma County, I can tell you what that's going to look like. Assuming that we get approved by the state, which we should hear from, we were hoping to hear today, but hopefully we will hear tomorrow. And we actually already have pre-drafted a public health order that would bring us into that next phase, based on what the state is going to allow us to do. Number one that I think a lot of people are talking about is outdoor dining. So we are actually not planning on moving forward with indoor dining opportunities at this point in time. We will open up outdoor dining opportunities, both at restaurants as well as at breweries or wineries, or other sort of tasting facilities. If there's a cidery or something like that, that would count as well. They can't just have alcohol. It can't just be wine tasting or beer tasting. It has to be served with a meal. However, the order does expressly allow people to contract with local restaurants or, other sort of food providers. So it could actually provide an economic benefit not only for the brewery or the tasting room, but also potentially for a restaurant or a caterer, right, who would actually provide that food service. And there are requirements that will be spelled out in terms of obviously adequate social distancing and protective measures required for those businesses to operate. Another one that is coming would be summer day camps for childcare purposes. So they would still be required to, meet certain guidelines in terms of maximum, group sizes and all those kinds of things, but that will be permitted if we receive that attestation, variance approval from the state of California, and if we are able to move forward with our public health order. Also, and I think this is really exciting for graduates around the county, we have also asked to be allowed to allow drive-in ceremonies. This means that you could actually do drive-in graduation ceremonies. The restriction would be that it can only be family members within the car, but you could decorate your car, and at least it would offer our graduates a little bit of an opportunity to celebrate. In addition to the drive-in ceremonies, you would also be allowed to do drive-in religious services as well as movies. So that would also offer up another opportunity. And I actually just heard from someone today that there is someone who is really interested in potentially having drive-in movies at the Forestville Youth Park, which I think would be a nice change of pace. Also, a clarification would be coming that faith-based counseling would be permitted if telework is not available. So if it cannot be done by telephone or virtually, faith-based counseling would be permitted. And also a note that curbside pickup for libraries would also be allowed. So sort of calling that out. Again, this is not taking effect right now. We are still waiting to hear from the state to sort of affirm that, our attestation was approved. They will post our county on the website. And then once our county is posted on the website, then we will release the public health order, and then it will take effect. It usually takes effect the next day after being released. So that is the main updates that I have. I just also wanted to let you know that that attestation that was submitted to the state yesterday, stating that we meet their criteria. We also received letters of support from all of the hospitals in Sonoma County. So they also stated a letter of support for moving forward with this phased reopening. So I am going to go ahead and go to questions and see what all you are wanting to know about and see if I can answer them as quickly as I possibly can. So I am scrolling down over here. This says, why include the mandatory food component for wineries and breweries? This is a really excellent question, and one that I asked at County Council yesterday morning because I didn't understand why is there a food requirement for wineries and breweries and tasting rooms, because in fact that actually could potentially prolong the exposure, right? Or people, if they're sitting down for a meal, might spend more time in those locations than they would otherwise. This is a state rule, and the state actually literally made us say, not only was it food, it has to be a meal. Because when I read the draft of the public health order and it said meal, I was like, well, how do we define meal? You know, if it's a charcuterie plate a meal, what if someone wants to just provide some local cheese, from a local dairy over here? And it literally, the state required us to say meal because they are not allowing breweries and wineries to reopen just for themselves. And so it has to be essentially a brewery or a winery functioning as a restaurant. This is where sometimes I beat my head against the wall with government because it doesn't necessarily make sense, but the state has these phases, right? And so in phase 2, we are not allowed to just reopen, wineries or breweries. It has to be for meal service. So that is the rule. Question on why is there concrete at the beach turnouts? That was not a county thing. To my knowledge, I didn't actually have any heads up about that in advance, but those are all state parks. So state parks owns those turnouts and those pullouts, right? We actually have, we've got Doran Beach, we've got some other spots further up the coast, but we don't have a ton of those types of coastal access points. So those are all state owned, and they're also in the Caltrans right of way. So that would have been a state decision. And I don't know if it was a Caltrans decision or if it was a state parks decision or if it was a joint decision. But I actually did not know that those K-rails were going in until I started getting photographs and text messages and things. But I would assume that it's in anticipation of the Memorial Day weekend and trying to moderate those crowds that they're expecting to see this weekend, especially with the temperatures rising. So again, not totally clear on exactly what happened there. Let's see. Question, do you know how the outdoor dining might work? Do servers wear masks? Do patrons wear masks when they're not eating? So this is a great question. I do know that there will be a minimum 6 feet from patron to patron. So you'll have the sort of tables will be at least 6 feet apart, but a little bit more to allow obviously for the chairs around the tables. Facial coverings, I'm sure, will be required of employees, as well as probably patrons if they're not eating, but I don't have any details. Actually, you know what? I could look on sonomaedb.org. So that's actually a place that you could check out. If you go to sonomaedb.org, that and then you click on SoCo Launch, that actually has the best management practices for all of the different industries. So there will be some guidelines that are spelled out very clearly in the public health order, but there will also be some best management practices that you can find on SoCo Launch, which is on sonomaedb.org. I also wanted to mention that another requisite, and I understand that this is actually a state mandate because I've heard it in other counties as well, is that when you're going out to that outdoor dining experience, it has to be that everyone at the same table is a member of the same household. This obviously becomes, a little bit challenging to police, but we are hoping that everyone will act in good faith and follow that rule. So the idea is that, you're not going out and you're not partying with a bunch of friends. You're not going to get a table for 12 and have, 5 different households there. It is sort of one table, one household. So you go out with your family, you enjoy your meal, and then you go back home. So I'm going to go see the next question. Let's see. Will the county be considering reopening on a regional basis within Sonoma County? That's an excellent question, and the answer is no. So, this is a decision that's made at the county level. So the public health officer actually has jurisdiction even inside city limits. So any decision that's made within the confines of the county would apply to whether you are inside the city of Sebastopol, inside the city of Santa Rosa, Petaluma, any of the other incorporated cities, or in an unincorporated area like Bodega Bay or Forestville or Guerneville. So all of the decisions do apply countywide. That said, enforcement is actually up to the local jurisdiction. So you might find that, we're already sort of hearing reports that some jurisdictions are maybe a little bit more aggressive with their enforcement than others. And so if you see any disparities in the way that, things are being done, it is likely on the enforcement side and not on the actual public health order side, because we should all be abiding by the same public health order. All right. Question from Sandy: what kind of summer camps is this? So this is essentially it's camps for the purposes of childcare. I don't really have any additional details at this point in time. I do know that we have regulations not only at the local level, right? So our public health order actually spells out regulations for childcare. There are also actually licensing requirements by the state. And so if you're a licensed childcare facility, you actually need to comply with both the licensing requirements by the state as well as the local requirements. And those sometimes differ. So you always, of course, have to go to the most stringent requirement, whether it's local or state. So I can definitely try to get some more information for you. But the goal, I think, is really to open up, summer camps as a form of childcare over the summer. Question from Frankie: childcare centers having to wear masks, why? They have to eat, and children under 5, it's not recommended. Then why is this? And I'm trying to see if I can click see more. County making them wear masks. So I want to be clear, masks are recommended. They are not mandated, and it does note in the public health order sort of as developmentally appropriate. And I'm a mom. I've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And I mean, anyone who thinks that a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old could wear a mask all day, it's not going to happen, right? It's going to lead to tantrums. It's going to lead to panic. It's just, you're not going to be able to keep that mask on the kid. And so we recognize that. And we've had a lot of conversations. Actually, I convened a group of childcare, early childhood education, preschool leaders in the county. And then we actually did facilitate a presentation to the entire full board of supervisors from that amazing group of women that I sort of spoke with. And we actually are providing recommendations, not me, but the childcare experts, to the public health officer as we go forward. Because Dr. Mace is brilliant. She's really, really smart woman. She's, a top of the line epidemiologist, but what she is not an expert in, say, early childhood education. And so the opportunity to bring early childhood education experts to sort of inform the process going forward, that's how I think we're going to wind up with the best result, right? Because it's impossible for an epidemiologist to be an expert in absolutely everything, right? How do libraries work? How do schools work? How do, preschools work? How does this business work, right? No, she sets the parameters, and then we have conversations about the best way to implement those, given the sort of real, in situ situations that we're seeing in Sonoma County. So masks are, recommended, encouraged as much as you possibly can, right? Try to teach those kids to wear masks, but it is not a mandate. So please don't, have anxiety over not being able to get children in a childcare setting to wear a mask all day. All right, question from Heather: do you have an estimate on when retail will be open for other than pickup? So I believe that destination retail, that's what they're calling it, destination retail, which sounds like some sort of a, sitcom or something. But that is not until phase 3, I believe, in the state. I can double check that, but I'm pretty sure that it's in phase 3, and phase 3 is not on the radar yet, right? We haven't heard from the state whether that's going to be in weeks or whether it's going to be in months, or what the criteria is to move into phase 3. I think the state wants to get, the vast majority of all of the counties into phase 2 before opening up phase 3, but I don't have any information on that at this point in time. This is a great question from Anastasio. When is the deadline for public schools to release fall plans? I have actually been on the phone a lot about this week, and I had a wonderful meeting with all of our West County superintendents earlier this week as well, just to check in, see how things are going. And I was on the phone also with one of our state representatives, staff people, earlier this evening, specifically around schools. My understanding is that in the next few weeks, CDPH, the California Department of Public Health, will be releasing guidelines for the entire state for schools. Sort of best guess is that there will probably still also be some local interpretation that's required. So once we get those overall guidelines from the state, right, then our public health officer will review them and work with the superintendents, and sort of all of our local school experts to make sure that we have a protocol for our school system locally. I want to acknowledge we have a huge diversity of schools in Sonoma County, right? First of all, K through 5, that might be treated a little bit differently than a high school, right? And, in the sort of grades, it might be easier to keep children in a classroom all day and not have them, sort of move around. They might maybe eat their lunch in the classroom as opposed to going to a common area to eat lunch. They might only be allowed to recreate outside in groups with their classmates. There's a lot of conversation happening about, will there be a hybrid system, where there's still some partial distance learning and some in classroom learning, or whether some, schools will actually only stick to distance learning. So right now, unfortunately, the answer is we don't yet know. We are waiting for that guidance from the state. Once we have that guidance from the state, then we'll move forward with a local plan. I do want you to know that Sonoma County Office of Education has formed a reopening task force. Dana Pedersen, the superintendent of Guerneville School, is a member of that task force, so she is part and parcel of this process going forward, and she has promised to keep me in the loop. So they are looking at, what is the capacity. Here's one of the hard things. It is a really tough time to be, a teacher or superintendent or anyone in the school system right now, because their budgets are being cut at the same time as they're being asked to do things that they've never had to do before. And so, whether it's a hybrid system, whether it's purely distance learning, whether there is some sort of pod system that's also being, discussed, of small groups of children who just stay with one another, maybe that they're not required to social distance, especially, try to social distance with a kindergartner. That's going to be very challenging. Anyways, a lot more to come on the school stuff. I want you to know I am tracking it very closely, and I will stay in close touch with all of our superintendents, as well as the state, as those guidelines come out. If you're interested, I'm sure you probably, if you're following education, you probably know that the CDC just recently released guidelines that caused quite a stir, because it kind of forced everyone to, reimagine what schools could look like. But if you Google CDC school guidelines, you find that pretty easily, and you can read through what the CDC's current thoughts are.
Are the dams going in? That's the next question.
Great question. Are the dams growing in? That is the next question. And I can say that we don't have a formal sort of, opinion right now, but based on my most recent conversation with Dr. Mace, as well as Regional Parks Director Bert Whitaker, it does look like there will be dams in the lower Russian River specifically to support fire safety, right? So the fact is, at the end of the day, we have a situation where without the dams, we're going to have a very, very narrow, very shallow Russian River and a lower Russian River. And in the lower Russian River area, there are very few places that a helicopter can actually go to scoop water, because we've got a lot of tall trees, right? Not a lot of big, wide open spaces of water where we could go and grab water in order to douse a fire. However, with the dams in, that does create a wider, deeper river that could enable a helicopter to fly through and scoop the water. And so for that reason, it is likely that the dam installation will be allowed to proceed, again, for fire safety, not for really purposes of recreation, but to just acknowledge that benefit is a critical one for our lower Russian River community.
What's happening with casinos, projected openings?
That's a great question. What is happening with the casino projected opening? I do not have a lot of updates on that. I did hear from my colleague, Supervisor David Rabbit, who represents that area, that the casino was investing in these completely state-of-the-art thermal scanners for sort of everyone who would walk in to have their temperature be taken. I don't have a lot of information beyond that. They are a sovereign nation, so they do have a level of independence that is not afforded to any other, business that is a non-tribal business in Sonoma County. So ultimately they do have their own authority, because you are essentially walking into a different country when you walk onto a sovereign territory of a tribe. So just wanted to put that out there, but I can certainly look into that and find out if there's any kind of a timeline. I do know, again, that they're taking this very seriously, and that they're investing in some very high technology in order to try to keep people safe.
Can vacation home owners start visiting their own homes on the weekends?
Sorry, it was can what?
Vacation homeowners.
Oh, can vacation homeowners start visiting their own homes on the weekends? So you're not technically still supposed to visit your second home for tourism purposes, right? For just visiting and enjoying yourself. However, you are allowed to visit if you do need to conduct maintenance in order to keep your home habitable. So if it's important to go and make sure that there are no leaking pipes, fix something at your house, check in on if there was, usually a leak and it was raining or something like that, you are allowed to visit for those maintenance types of purposes. But at this point in time, you are supposed to be sheltering in place in one residence. So you choose a residence and you shelter in place there. That could actually be your second home, but then you're supposed to actually stay put in that second home and consider that to be your primary residence for the duration of shelter in place. All right, let's see if we got some help, because I'm behind on my scrolling.
Regional parks, are they overcrowded, or are people behaving appropriately?
That's a great question. So the question is, how is it going at regional parks? Are they overcrowded? Are people behaving appropriately? I think that it's it's a mix, right? There's some pressure some places. I know that I was on the phone with Bert Whitaker earlier today, and we're both going to be keeping a very close eye on the lower Russian River because we expect there to be a lot of pressure as the temperatures rise with Memorial Day weekend and, people wanting to get in the water to cool off. And so we're going to be paying, very close attention. And if we need to, sort of putting up signs to sort of shut things down if we have to, we don't want to get there. We really hope that people will follow the rules, that they will maintain social distancing, that they will bring their facial coverings and utilize them as necessary. So far, I haven't heard of any major problems. Aside from the frustrations with overflow parking that we saw when the inland parks were closed, and the frustrations that we still see with parking in residential neighborhoods of people who are still going to the coast. So the park rangers, I think, are optimistic, but we also know that it's probably going to be a bit of a tough weekend as we see those crowds increase. So we'll be keeping a close eye on it, and I know I'll be in touch with Bert over the weekend and going in and checking it out myself.
Is there a time frame for hotels to reopen for tourism?
This is a great question, and one that I ask all the time, which is there a time frame for our hotels to reopen? So that is not on the table for phase 2, right? Which is what we're in. We're moving into phase 2B, and so fundamentally, we're looking at phase 3 or even potentially phase 4 for those kinds of things. They have not really stated exactly with clarity, what levels of hotels or lodging facilities might be permitted in phase 3. At this point in time, we don't know the criteria for phase 3. We don't know the timeline for phase 3. And we don't know, obviously then whether we're meeting it or what the timeline could potentially be for Sonoma County. So unfortunately, I don't have any information on that. And I know it's a huge frustration for everyone who's in the hospitality industry right now, but I'll just be perfectly honest with you. No crystal ball. I don't know, but I am, constantly trying to keep myself informed about what's happening on the state level, what the conversations are, and I will track that and let you know anything as soon as I do.
Somebody just wants to clarify if childcare is open only for workers, or are there just for fun camps?
Okay, this is a great question. So the question is childcare open just for workers, or are there sort of just for fun camps? So childcare, we sort of broaden the definition, right? So it's not just for essential workers anymore. So you can avail yourself of childcare even if you are not an essential worker. One thing that I missed sort of saying last time is that I've also been getting some questions about, well, what if you have one parent who works and one parent who stays home? Well, that parent who stays home also works, right? And there are things to be done that need doing. That sometimes it's very helpful to have a child, outside of the home at a safe child care facility in order to conduct that. That includes essential activities that we also permit, things like cleaning your house, sort of bookkeeping. All of those kinds of things that we unfortunately traditionally undervalue in our society, those are also critical functions. And so again, there is no longer a delineation for childcare only being open for essential workers.
Is WCCS planning a sanctioned encampment in the river area? If so, where?
Okay, this is a question. Is West County Community Services planning a sanctioned encampment in the lower Russian River area? If so, where? And I want to be very clear, there is no plan for a sanctioned encampment at this point in time. What we are, though, having conversations about how are we going to address homelessness for the duration of the pandemic, including in the lower Russian River, right? So there isn't, I've heard a lot of sort of allegations of we're going to be planning some kind of a tent city in the lower Russian River. There is no plan for a tent city. However, there are existing encampments right now in downtown Guerneville. There is one that is currently on the property that West County Health Centers will be redeveloping, right? Where Food for Humans is down there by Safeway. There are also people who are living on the riverbanks. And so these are not safe situations. Social distancing is not being obtained. So I have had conversations with our providers down there about how do we address this? Could there be, something where we create a social distancing, maybe a sanctioned encampment, but there is no firm plan yet. There is no place yet. And we are just sort of having conversations about how we're going to address this going forward. The exact same conversations are happening at the county level and at the city level as well, because no one has a playbook for how to address homelessness in the midst of a pandemic. So trust me, if we have any kind of a conversation that is saying, hey, we're looking at these multiple, sites, we will definitely be transparent with the community about that. So right now, there's just kind of dipping our toe in the water thoughts about how do we handle this and how do we make sure that we don't have a pandemic outbreak in our unsheltered community in Guerneville, because that could endanger everybody. I will say that there is some really good news, which is that 11 unsheltered individuals from the lower Russian River area, so homeless residents, have actually been placed at the alternative care site at Sonoma State University. So we are actually getting some of our higher risk, for medical complications of COVID-19, unsheltered populations into better places. So that's really good news. But we also know that, not everyone is going to go there. And so how can we provide some kind of compassionate, humane solution in the meantime? I'm all about that, and we're going to have a conversation as a community about how we move forward with that. I also want to be very clear, a lot of the accusations were around, is there a tent city that's being planned, that's going to take everyone from the entire county? No, we would never put a county-wide site in Guerneville. That makes no sense, right? But what we need to do is take care of those folks who are already in Guerneville and find someplace safe for them to go.
When will we get testing in Guerneville area?
Question, when will we get testing in Guerneville area? That is a great idea, and I will follow up and see if we can get a mobile sort of, we're starting to do rotational testing locations, right? So we might not have a permanent location stationed out in Guerneville, but what we would hope to do is, have, say, a once a week or a once every 2 weeks where it's a little bit easier to get tested. So I will definitely follow up on that, and I had given them a few different location options. I was looking at possibly, we've got El Molino High School in Forestville. We have Guerneville Elementary. There are a few different sites that have sufficient, parking lot space that could be utilized in the river area. So I'm going to keep fighting for that, and I will also keep fighting for a coastal location as well, because I recognize that some folks are even further afield and it's even harder to drive.
Any idea whether the Grove is planning their encampments this year?
Great question. Is the Grove planning their encampment this year? No. The answer is no. It is canceled. No Grove encampment this year.
When will churches reopen?
Question is, when will churches reopen? That is not in the governor's phase 2. So sort of congregation type settings, traditional church services. We actually asked for even sort of religious services to be allowed through our attestation process, and the state told us that no, that's not allowed in phase 2. So that would be a phase 3 or later phenomenon. So again, we unfortunately don't have the timing with respect to phase 3. So, however, the good news with respect to church service is that we will have drive-in church service opportunities that would work for your congregation, and virtual church services are currently allowed as well.
Is there discussion around youth sports?
Question, is there discussion around youth sports? Again, I think that would be sort of a question around what kind of youth sports do you mean? So if you're talking about the standard youth sports where you have different teams coming and competing from all over the place, that is likely a very high risk activity that would not be permitted, in the foreseeable future. However, if you're talking about a summer camp that has a particular theme, that is something that could be permitted, again, with these modifications, right? So kids would have to be in a certain group size. It would have to be a consistent group with a consistent teacher. But they would be allowed to, participate in recreational or sports activities within the context of that group. We're scrolling. My husband's scrolling. 1 second. We'll get to the next question. Got anything else? We're still scrolling. See if I can catch up too.
Are there projections of when fire season is likely to start?
This is a great question. Are there projections as to when fire season is likely to start? Unfortunately, this is already shaping up to be not a good fire season. In terms of the state is projecting that our fire season here in Sonoma County will arrive approximately 1 month earlier than it normally does. So we were looking at a prolonged fire season. Additionally, learned from Fire Chief Ben Nichols, a CAL FIRE division chief here locally, that they are particularly concerned about Creighton Ridge and a potential repeat of the Creighton Ridge fire, which many folks remember. I think that was back in the 60s. And so that's kind of just has a statewide sort of focus to make sure, that we are prepared. And I know that Fire Chief Ben Nichols, as well as UCCE and a lot of different property owners, have really been focused on controlled burns along the North Coast area to try to decrease some of that vegetation loading that we're seeing out there. But this is going to be a potentially long fire season. And we also don't have any information yet about PG&E and sort of what their PSPS protocols are going to look like in the pandemic. But that is also top of mind, as well as, what would it look like if we have a pandemic and a power shutdown and a fire. So we're trying to go through all of that worst case scenario planning and make sure that we are all prepared. If you do have questions about sort of fire season and preparation in the pandemic, on this Facebook page, there is a saved video. We had a great town hall last week in which we had Fire Chief Santa Rosa and Ops Area Manager Tony Gossner. We had Sam Wallace from the Department of Emergency Management. We had the amazing Cara Leone and Roberta from Fire Safe Sonoma sharing lots of tips about how to prepare yourself for this wildfire season.
Can tasting rooms that don't serve food reopen if 2B is approved?
Can tasting rooms that can't serve food open if 2B is approved? No. So if you cannot serve food as a tasting room, you cannot reopen. The tasting has to be paired with a meal. That said, we are looking at some things within. So for instance, we do have some wineries and tasting rooms that are literally not permitted to serve food by their use permit. We're looking to see if there's anything that we could do as a county to pass some kind of an urgency ordinance to allow them to serve food just for the duration of the public health order, or even for just a few months. Because we do see that, this could actually be a positive thing, again, for the caterers and restaurants to be able to get their food, and expand their footprint. Unfortunately, some of our restaurants are going to have a hard time because they have very small internal footprints. They may not have access to outsourced space, and so it'll be difficult for them to reopen with the new modified requirements that everyone's going to be requiring. So maybe one more question and then can wrap it up. What do you have? I'm trying to scroll as well. Let's see. I do see someone said, my primary concern is the long-term mental health impacts of all this isolation on my children. Have kids ages 11, 14, and 17. Depression and anxiety are really setting in. I recognize this, and actually I was just on the phone yesterday. We are still moving forward at the county level with a sales tax initiative that will fund mental and behavioral health services. This was something that was started well before the pandemic. This was started last year, started talking about this, started talking to the cities. There is obviously an even more crushing and overwhelming need for these services right now. And the feedback that I gave when I saw the draft expenditure plan was that specifically we needed more funding for children. I mean, I am even seeing this in my own kids who are, 7 and 5, and well, the 1-year-old has no clue, but there is just a palpable anxiety, even just from hearing things on the news, from hearing their parents talk. It's a challenging time for all of us, and I really want to make sure that if we are going to go to the voters and ask for a sales tax right now, which I think is a big ask, right? A lot of people are hurting financially, and the thought of adding, one more tax, it can be really challenging. But we have to take care of our kids, and we have to ensure that there are counselors and support for those kids, if and when they're able to return to school. And so that's a big focus of mine, and something that I advocated for more funding for. The sales tax initiative would also include reinstating what's known as the CAPE program, which is a crisis assistance and prevention, program. And basically that's if there's some kind of a crisis at a school, they can, go in and provide emergency support for the children. But it's focused on high school. I really think that we need to be looking at, elementary school as well. So we are going to be focusing on mental health resources. We'll be putting together the sales tax initiative and hoping that the voters do choose to support it despite the challenging financial times. And if that goes forward, I think that will provide a lot of resources for the next generation. But I hear you. There is a warm line. I don't have the phone number memorized, but if you go to socoemergency.org, you can actually have, and you're welcome to have your teenagers give that a call. There are counselors available. It's Monday through Friday, I think. I don't remember if there might be Saturday hours as well, but check that out on socoemergency.org. It's one of those things that I used to have programmed in my brain, but there's a lot of information flying around right now. So anyways, I see one last question from Kathy. Any update on opening the beaches to the public? This is a great question. We're not going to be opening the beaches to the public before Memorial Day weekend, and we will be working on doing this in tandem with Marin County. So that means that, we don't want to go ahead of Marin County because we might be swamped. Marin County doesn't want to go ahead of us because, then they might be swamped. And so we're hopefully going to be opening that entire stretch of the coastline in tandem with Marin County, and of course in partnership with state parks. But I would say that we are, hopefully maybe a couple of weeks away. I don't have a firm date right now because a lot of it's going to depend on what the data looks like, right? We want to make sure that we're not seeing, runaway cases of community transmission in Sonoma County. I will acknowledge we have seen more cases in the past week than we have seen in prior weeks. And this is exactly what, Dr. Mace said would happen. She said, we should move forward with reopening, do it in slow phases. And yes, as we move forward with reopening, even with things like reopening we'll start to see more cases in the community. And the critical thing, I believe, is to make sure that we are well within the capacity of our healthcare system, that we have adequate testing for everyone, and that we're also providing adequate resources and education, and particularly to our medically fragile community members, right? So we need to make sure that we are taking care of those who are most susceptible to this disease as we move forward with a thoughtful, data-driven reopening plan. So anyways, on that note, I hope that everyone has a safe and healthy Memorial Day weekend. Keep your social distance, keep your facial coverings, but it's a great day, great weekend to go out there and enjoy some of the beautiful natural spaces in Sonoma County. Just, try to go to a park that's pretty close to you and hang out and enjoy the beautiful sunshine and sky. Be well. You can always reach me at linda.hopkins@sonoma-county.org. If I missed any of the questions, I'd be happy to answer them there. Take care and have a good night.